Welcome to Pitt Street Uniting Church. I'm the chair of the Church Council, and it's my privilege to actually be here to welcome you and to welcome our distinguished panellists. It's wonderful to see so many people here, and we know that this is an issue that is so strongly in people's minds and has been very much so in this congregation. You may have seen we have our Cry Out for Gaza over the door, and we had a fantastic interfaith event here with a few hundred people a couple of weeks ago. So it's a cause that is very close to our heart, and this is a congregation that has always been at the forefront of social issues. So we're very pleased and very proud to be able to host this tonight. So I think that's all I need to tell you, and I will hand over to Katie.
Thanks so much, Jolyon, and for hosting us this evening. We've got angels watching over us, people. My name's Katie Shammas. I'm the Executive Officer at the Australia-Palestine Advocacy Network, and I'm going to be your host this evening. But thank you very much to Stop the War in Palestine for organising this evening. I'd like to welcome Uncle Ken Canning. He is a Murray activist. Ken is a Murray activist, writer and poet whose people are from the Kunja clan of the Bidjara Nation in southwest Queensland, and Uncle Ken is going to acknowledge country for us.
I'd like to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation whose land we stand on, and to also acknowledge this is the point of first impact of colonisation, of the taking over of our country, and acknowledge that we stand hand in hand with Palestinian people. In 1788, our Nakba happened, and now, today, we're left with 3% of the population. We don't want to see that ever happen again. We don't want to see that. We stand hand in hand. What is happening now is atrocious. It's absolutely atrocious. Words, I can't find the words to describe how I feel, the anger I feel at what is going on. All I can say is that we stand in solidarity with every single Palestinian person. My history with Palestinian people goes back to 1980 when I used to go to meetings in Punchbowl when I first hit Sydney. And I used to sit and sometimes with an interpreter talk to some old people who went through the Nakba. And they used to give me such an education. And they also had the respect to listen to our stories. I brought other Aboriginal people there. They had the respect to listen to the genocide that we went through. And they had the respect to honour us together as people who were suffering under the same colonial, murderous regimes. And as an Indigenous person, a First Nation person, I do not fully recognise our federal government. This is land never ceded, as is Palestine was never ceded. This is land never ceded, so I don't fully recognise our government. So I will tell them as a First Nations person, wake up to yourselves and stop all trading and any communications whatsoever with Israel. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Ken, and as a Palestinian person who's lived on Darug land most of my life, thank you for First Nations care for country. It sustained me during this time, as has your solidarity. We stand together in this. So tonight we're here to talk about the media, genocide and Western complicity. Randa Abdel Fattah has sent her apologies for this evening. She's had some personal circumstances come up, but we've got Ahmed Alabadla. Come on up, Ahmed. He's a Palestinian. I don't think Ahmed's a stranger to anyone here. Ahmed is a Palestinian from Gaza, living on Gadigal land. He's co-founder of Palestine Justice Movement Sydney and maker of Red Inverted Triangle. Newcomers, everyone check it out. It's a podcast dedicated to Palestinian storytelling as resistance, something super important when we talk about media complicity. Welcome, Ahmed. Antoinette Lattouf. I feel like it's related. Antoinette is an award-winning journalist, presenter, podcaster, author and human rights advocate. Her case, Lattouf versus ABC, became a flashpoint in debates about free speech, institutional cowardice and what happens when journalists speak truth to power. In 2024, she was awarded the New South Wales Council for Civil Liberties President's Award for Journalism and Liberty Victoria Voltaire Human Rights Award for amplifying human rights atrocities in Gaza and taking a stand in defence of free and fair press. Welcome, Antoinette.
Thank you.
And we have a guest from overseas, Chris Hedges. Is the Pulitzer Prize-winning former Middle East bureau chief for the New York Times and the author of 16 books, including his latest, A Genocide Foretold. Chris has been outspoken about the complicity of the Western press and its betrayal of Palestinian journalists. A betrayal we saw in full force by David Marr today, and we back you completely. He is currently working on a graphic novel with pioneering cartoonist Joe Sacco, based on in-depth interviews with Palestinians in Gaza. Welcome, Chris. So how tonight's going to go is everyone's going to have 5 to 10 minutes, and honestly, however long they want, speaking about media, genocide and Western complicity. And then we'll have some questions and a conversation. So enjoy the evening, and I'll hand over to Ahmed. Over to you.
My name is Ahmed. I'm Palestinian from Gaza and from Khan Yunis, or whatever is left of Khan Yunis. I'm extremely grateful for the opportunity to be speaking to you tonight alongside the fearless and the one and only Antoinette Lattouf and a giant in the movement like Chris Hedges. I'm also honored to be filling in with the brilliant Dr. Randa Abdel Fattah. So I apologize for the disappointment that you'll have to settle in with me today. Before I start, I must acknowledge that we are indeed today meeting on stolen, unceded land. I must acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today and pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. This land was never ceded, always was and always will be Aboriginal land, acknowledging that we're meeting today on a ground zero of a genocide that occurred more than 230 years ago, but its echoes still reverberate to our day. We are meeting today on Gadigal land. All Eyes on Gaza is the title of today's event, indeed. This has been the case for over the past 2 years. For those newcomers, welcome to the movement. 2 years of genocide, 2 years of starvation and forced famine, 2 years of strangulating, besiegement and blockade. But if you have a closer look to Gaza's history, you'll soon find out that the past 2 years have been nothing but an intensification of all those processes that have already been in place. One can argue ever since the creation of the besieged Gaza Strip. Gaza Strip, the biggest open-air prison on earth. Gaza Strip, the concentration camp, which has been turned into a death camp for the past 2 years. Growing up in Gaza is a very special experience. In between the first intifada, the second intifada, the frequent bouts of genocidal attempts, or what the Zionist regime would call mowing the lawn, with the Great March of Return up to the moment where we are now. Despite the pain and the suffering, and despite being discriminated against, racialized and demonized everywhere I go, even in so-called Arab countries, I have never been more proud of being Palestinian from Gaza. Gaza is and has always been the embodiment of the Palestinian resistance and steadfastness. Gaza is a microcosm of Palestine. Growing up in Gaza during the first intifada, the late 80s and the beginning of 90s, space and time used to be very limited commodities. Space limited by checkpoints, settlements, and the random places where the Israeli tanks decided to position themselves, and time limited by the short periods between curfews. Home invasions and raids and shooting in the streets, tanks roaming around, the oppression, the humiliation, the dehumanization, the breaking the bones, images of kids and youth facing up to Israeli soldiers who were armed to the teeth by throwing rocks and burning tires on the street, literally on a daily basis for months during the first intifada. Images of the Palestinian resistance fighters, or fidaiyin, being hunted from one house to another by the Israeli soldiers. Those images are hard to lose and become burned in your memory. Life in Gaza has always been like this. Even after the Israeli unilateral withdrawal in 2005, the oppression, and therefore the resistance to it, took a different tack back then, but continued to intensify following different patterns. But the first intifada was such an astounding moment in the history of the Palestinian struggle for liberation. It was a moment that repositioned Palestine on the map at a time when it was fading away from the global vision and consciousness. The reason I'm mentioning this today is because I think we are living a similar historic moment in this struggle for Palestine right now. And as always, Gaza is at the center of all that. Whether it's the recent perfunctory statements of recognition of the state of Palestine by some Western countries who not only failed to recognize genocide, but continued to directly feed it, or the Trump plan that admittedly is not even worth the ink and the paper that is printed on. All these come at a watershed moment, very similar to that during the first intifada. Indeed, the Trump plan is nothing but an attempt to co-opt the growing unprecedented global mobilization for Palestine, to reconfigure and restructure the occupation, to dismantle the Palestinian resistance, and more importantly, to attempt to salvage whatever is left of Israel's legitimacy and the legitimacy of its founding ideology, that's Zionism. In 1987's First Intifada, the Palestinians have revolted in a mass uprising that stormed the entirety of the Palestinian occupied territories, where all factions of the Palestinian society within the occupied Palestine were united along the same lines and narrative, rejecting the occupation and calling for the end of the Zionist colonization. It was such a strong moment in history of the Palestinian struggle that the Israeli regime was evidently unable to quell that unprecedented internal popular mobilization, which resulted in a huge awakening in the global public opinion to the question of Palestine. I was there, I witnessed that firsthand. It was a moment of reckoning. It was a moment very similar to this one we are living right now. Indeed, back then, the economic, political and moral cost of upholding the occupation was too high that Israel was pushed to reimagine its policies towards the Palestinians and the occupied territories. As Niv Gordon explains in his book, Israel's Occupation, the Intifada revealed to the world Israel's occupation as a colonial project that was sustained through political violence, a fact that had been obfuscated before the Intifada erupted. The uprising also broadened the struggle that had been defined almost purely in nationalistic terms to one that was also about basic human rights. At the time, the Palestinians managed to draw a connection between their struggle and the struggle of some of the liberation movements around the world, thus altering, to some degree, the representation and image of the Palestinian in the international media. Déjà vu. That hugely significant and watershed moment was, unfortunately, eventually hijacked and seized upon by the implementation of the infamous but disastrous also Oslo Accords and the peace process that ensued, which has always been designed to remain as a process. This was the moment when the system of the Israeli occupation was outsourced and subcontracted to a group of Palestinian elites who co-opted that big moment and established an apparatus to guarantee compliance with the occupying Israeli regime. The Western world was also instrumental in pushing for such an agreement, not to appease the Palestinians and ensure them their internationally sanctioned rights, but to maintain and sustain the state of Israel and therefore its imperial interference in the region. That Oslo peace process revived the concept of two-state solution from the 1937's Peel Commission. Only this time around, the Palestinians were offered close to 20% of historic Palestine. Also, déjà vu. Now, 30-odd years on, this moment, with the recognition and the prospects of the Trump plan, this moment is just as dangerous and insidious as the Oslo Accords moment. The only difference is that the Israeli regime back then was slightly less committed to the foundational doctrines of the Israeli state and to Zionism, and more flexible to allowing for a temporary settlement with the Palestinians than the current one, which is much more religiously and flagrantly committed to the foundational principles of this cancerous regime that are core to the ideology of Zionism. The other difference is that we have Trump in the White House. So yes, it is absolutely timely for the genocide to stop and to end. But the ceasefire should not be conditioned on sacrificing justice and accountability. The Palestinians should not be negotiating the end of their slaughter in the first place. No one should. And that plan must be absolutely rejected out of hand, the way Oslo Accords should have been rejected. There can never be a return to a pre-October the 7th, as the media continues to suggest. There can never be talks of a two-state illusion or peace processes anymore. As Dr. Ghada Karmi says, the two-state solution is dead and buried and should never be exhumed. There can never be peace as long as this racist, supremacist, barbaric, genocidal ideology remains. As long as that engine that generates nothing but hatred and violence ceases to exist. Zionism is the root cause of it all and must be abolished. Do we, in all consciousness, want to preserve the Israel that we've seen over the past 2 years? For the past 2 years, most of the world have watched the true face of Israel and Zionism, but we, Palestinians, have been enduring that for the past 77 years, or arguably for more than 100 years. But you know what? As I always say, forget about us. Forget about the Palestinians. We don't exist, as some Zionists might suggest. Forget about the genocide. When you hear that more than 80% of a society actively support the shredding of babies, mocking the victims of the genocide and the forced starvation on TikTok videos, cheering the complete annihilation of another society to biblical proportions, literally citing the Bible to justify that. When you watch Israeli soldiers filming themselves proudly, in glee, killing infants in incubators, are we really okay with allowing such a society to thrive? The world has to contend with this level of inhumanity regardless who the victim is. Now, I'm not inciting violence here, but a society that is built on such a racist, supremacist ideology as Zionism can only naturally behave that way. For decades, this ideology has transformed the Jews of this unholy state into beastly creatures that cannot see Palestinians as human. Zionism must be fought and eliminated. Not only because of the injustices it continues to inflict upon Palestinians, but because of the harm and damage it did and continues to do to Judaism and the Jewish communities worldwide. They say criticizing Israel is anti-Semitic. As a matter of fact, as Israel continues to commit the crime of crimes against the Palestinians and continues to do all that in the name of the world Jews, it would be actually anti-Semitic not to criticize Israel. The Jewish people need to be rescued from Zionism and to be welcomed back into the folds of humanity. And those mouthpieces of Zionism and genocide cheerleaders, the likes of David Marr of the ABC Radio National, who interviewed Chris yesterday, alongside those Zionist agents of a foreign country who bully anti-genocide free speech, those individuals, those elements will eventually be thrown out into the dustbins of history. I'll end with saying that we are indeed, as Chris mentioned yesterday, about to start a media campaign against David Marr. We will not only be forcing the ABC Radio National to apologize, but to dismiss this, and I'm quoting Chris here, piece of shit. So, please stay tuned for that. I'll leave it there. Free Palestine, abolish Zionism.
Thank you so much, Ahmed, for that. If I was a newsroom leader or a presenter working at a media outlet, this is the point where I would say the IDF denies all of those allegations. The IDF is not committing war crimes. The IDF says there is no genocide. The IDF says that you are anti-Semitic. And that seems to be the default of so many news organisations, despite the overwhelming evidence giving deference to Israel and giving deference to its repeated lies seems to be one of the ways in which the media is sadly not only enabling these war crimes and these atrocities, but in many ways covering up
for the actions of Israel. I do want to take a moment to acknowledge that we meet on unceded land and acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. It's sad but unsurprising that as a nation that struggles to reconcile with its own genocidal and brutal origins, that it isn't particularly gracious or caring or humane as we watch a live-streamed genocide. I'm going to be brief today because I am keen to get to the questions and also get to the audience interaction, but I have 3 quick points I'd like to make. And the first one is to thank all of you in the room, including those who are new, or perhaps this is one of your first events, particularly at a time when it's probably easier and more convenient to look away. Choosing to bear witness, choosing to care about human rights atrocities, choosing to care about something that is politically unpopular or something that could get you fired from work, that could get you ostracised from circles. Choosing to continue to turn up is a credit to you, and I thank you. And this is at a time when Israel has created the largest cohort of paediatric amputees in history. And if we're to talk about the attacks on press freedom, journalists that have been killed in Gaza, it's difficult, some killed, many assassinated amongst those killed. There have been more journalists killed in Gaza than World War I, World War II, the Balkan Wars and the Vietnam War combined. This is an assault on the truth. This is an assault on our peers, and too many in Western newsrooms have stayed silent or continue to run those propaganda lies about who these people are and were they really journalists, and peddle the IDF rebuttals before we even get a name or a face or get to tell the story of these brave humans who are not only doing journalism, but they're reporting the genocide of their own people. The second point I'd like to make is the only way that people like Chris can continue the work that he does and I can continue the work that I do is if you support independent media. A lot of people are watching to see the few journalists who've been critical of outlets that they've either worked for, used to work for, or continue to work for. It's really tricky to navigate. The media industry in Australia is small. I was obviously targeted by a couple of WhatsApp groups, Lawyers for Israel and another WhatsApp group, who were not only boasting about when I got fired, but making comments like, let's make sure she is unemployable. And it's important because not only that I fought back and that I won, and then we have a federal court ruling. And that we have a federal court ruling, in the Justice's own words, it says that ABC bowed to pro-Israel lobbyists, that I was fired for my political opinion because of my criticisms of the actions of Israel, the military actions of Israel, and a reminder that $2.5 million that the AB spent fighting me, spent using our taxpayer dollars, was over a post I shared where Human Rights Watch reports starvation as a tool of war. That is what the ABC was willing to bet its credibility and its independence in our taxpayer dollars on. We know that Israel is using starvation as a tool of war. The ABC itself had reported twice that Israel was using starvation as a tool of war. This is the environment that journalists are trying to work within. I have many friends who continue to work for outlets. They're struggling. They're struggling because they think that if they're not there, who else will push? Who else will try to get that headline changed? Who else will try and humanise a Palestinian or get a human rights organisations on? So I feel an enormous amount of empathy for those journalists in those organisations. It's easy for me to say quit, start your own thing, but it's difficult. Not everybody has a profile, not everybody has a following. So my point to all of you here tonight is please support independent media. I want to ensure that we can be a success story, because younger journalists are coming up to me all the time going, how do I do it? Where do I go? And I can't in good faith say, you know what, try and get a cadetship at ABC. Maybe try The Guardian. I cannot. A couple of years ago I would have done that. I cannot at this moment, particularly culturally diverse journalists or journalists with an Arabic-speaking or Muslim background, say that you are safe in an organisation like that. So if I can ask one favour of everybody in the room, if you have Apple Podcasts or Spotify, there's a podcast that Jan Fran and I host called We Used to Be Journos. For those who don't follow, if you pull out your phone, We Used to Be Journos, hit a quick follow. By demonstrating that we will grow and hire and have a bigger voice and bring on more journalists, it signals not only a pushback to the lobbyists who wanted to make me unemployable, but also to other journalists that they can go out on their own, or younger journalists, that there is a path where you still speak truth to power and facts tell the story, not fear. And finally, continue to amplify Palestinian stories and Palestinian journalists. I know particularly in my feed on Instagram, I see that certain journalists that I follow have been shadow banned. I see that the algorithm is burying a lot of what is happening in Gaza. Unfortunately, a lot of the journalists in Gaza that I used to follow, they've been killed. And so I urge everybody to make an extra effort to share their stories, to amplify their stories, read their books, listen, learn, amplify. They are the only journalists reporting the atrocities happening in Gaza. As many of you would know, Western journalists are banned from entering, and the least we can do is listen and amplify. So send to Palestinian voices and continue to tell their stories. Thank you.
Thank you. Shortly after the genocide began, a very courageous Egyptian journalist, Khaled Abashi, who's the head of the Egyptian Press Syndicate, called on foreign journalists to come to Egypt and go to Rafah and demand that the foreign press be allowed to enter and that the international community impose a ceasefire. I flew to Egypt to join Khaled and my other colleagues, and I sat up all night on the plane, and this is what I wrote. Dear child, it is past midnight. I am flying at hundreds of miles an hour in the darkness, thousands of feet over the Atlantic Ocean. I am traveling to Egypt. I will go to the border of Gaza at Rafah. I go because of you. You have never been in a plane. You have never left Gaza. You know only the densely packed streets and alleys, the concrete hovels. You know only the security barriers and fences patrolled by soldiers that surround Gaza. Planes, for you, are terrifying. Fighter jets, attack helicopters, drones, they circle above you. They drop missiles and bombs, deafening explosions. The ground shakes, buildings fall, the dead, the screams. The muffled calls for help from beneath the rubble. It does not stop, night and day. Trapped under the piles of smashed concrete, your playmates, your schoolmates, your neighbors, gone in seconds. You see the chalky faces and limp bodies when they are dug out. I am a reporter. It is my job to see this. You are a child. You should never see this. The stench of death, rotting corpses under broken concrete. You hold your breath. You cover your mouth with a cloth. You walk faster. Your neighborhood has become a graveyard. All that was familiar is gone. You stare in amazement. You wonder where you are. You are afraid, explosion after explosion. You cry. You cling to your mother or father. You cover your ears. You see the white light of the missile and wait for the blast. Why do they kill children? What did you do? Why can't anyone protect you? Will you be wounded? Will you lose a leg or an arm? Will you go blind or be in a wheelchair? Why were you born? Was it for something good? Or was it for this? Will you grow up? Will you be happy? What will it be like without your friends? Who will die next? Your mother, your father, your brothers and sisters? Someone you know will be injured soon. Someone you know will die soon. At night you lie in the dark on the cold cement floor. The phones are cut, the internet is off. You do not know what is happening. There are flashes of light. There are waves of blast concussions. There are screams. It does not stop. When your father or mother hunts for food or water, you wait. That terrible feeling in your stomach. Will they come back? Will you see them again? Will your tiny home be next? Will the bombs find you? Are these your last moments on earth? You drink salty, dirty water. It makes you very sick. Your stomach hurts. You are hungry. The bakeries are destroyed. There is no bread. You eat one meal a day, pasta, a cucumber. Soon, this will seem like a feast. You do not play with your soccer ball made of rags. You do not fly your kite made from old newspapers. You have seen foreign reporters. We wear flak jackets with the word press written on it. We have helmets. We have cameras. We drive jeeps. We appear after a bombing or a shooting. We sit over a coffee for a long time and talk to the adults. Then we disappear. We do not usually interview children, but I have done interviews when groups of you crowded around us, laughing, pointing, asking us to take your picture. I have been bombed by jets in Gaza. I have been bombed in other wars, wars that happened before you were born. I too was very, very scared. I still have dreams about it. When I see the pictures of Gaza, these wars return to me with a force of thunder and lightning. I think of you. All of us who have been to war hate war most of all because of what it does to children. I tried to tell your story. I tried to tell the world that when you are cruel to people, week after week, month after month, year after year, decade after decade, when you deny people freedom and dignity, when you humiliate and trap them in an open-air prison, when you kill them as if they were beasts, they become very angry. They do to others what was done to them. I told it over and over. I told it for 7 years. Few listened. And now this. There are very brave Palestinian journalists. Over 200 have been killed since this bombing began. They are heroes. So are the doctors and nurses in your hospitals. So are the UN workers, hundreds of whom have died. So are the ambulance drivers and the medics. So are the rescue parties that lift up the slabs of concrete with their hands. So are the mothers and fathers who shield you from the bombs. But we are not there. Not this time. We cannot get in. We are locked out. Reporters from all over the world are going to the border crossing at Rafah. We are going because we cannot watch this slaughter and do nothing. We are going because hundreds of people are dying a day, including children. We are going because this genocide must stop. We are going because we have children, like you, precious, innocent, loved. We are going because we want you to live. I hope one day we will meet. You will be an adult. I will be an old man, although to you I am already very old. In my dream for you, I will find you free and safe and happy. No one will be trying to kill you. You will fly in airplanes filled with people, not bombs. You will not be trapped in a concentration camp. You will see the world. You will grow up and have children. You will become old. You will remember this suffering, but you will know it means that you must help others who suffer. This is my hope, my prayer. We have failed you. This is the awful guilt we carry. We tried, but we did not try hard enough. We will go to Rafah, many of us, reporters. We will stand outside the border with Gaza in protest. We will write and film. This is what we do. It is not much, but it is something. We will tell your story again. Maybe it will be enough to earn the right to ask for your forgiveness. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chris. So, we're in a church, right, and there's this thing you do in Mass where you turn to the person next to you and you say, peace be with you. I'm not going to ask you to do that, but Chris's reading was a lot, and what we've experienced in a genocide these past 2 years is an assault on our collective humanity. And we need to check in on each other. So I just ask that we take a minute to turn to the person next to you, have a hug, I don't know, check in, even if they're a stranger, and then we'll get on with the panel. But we have to be Palestinians, and we are strong, and we keep fighting, right? So we're going to do this panel and through our tears and pain. So the first question I wanted to start with, and Antoinette and Chris mentioned the journalists in Gaza. We always enter our people in Gaza. and the heroism of the journalists. And I guess with the failure of Western media, many of us in the room have been getting our news from the ground, from these beautiful people. And I guess I was just wondering, from our panellists, is there a moment for you, there's probably lots, that is burned in your brain from one of our journalists that gives you a really stark contrast from their heroism versus Western media complicity?
Gosh, there are a few. I was in contact with Anas al-Sharif. He was awarded a Human Rights Defender Award by Amnesty International, and we have a mutual friend, and so I would amplify his work, and he would send messages, or when he was reporting on things, send it to me, and I would share it. And in the lead up to his assassination, had been messaging myself and a few other people here in Australia, including Amnesty International and some other groups, saying, they're coming after me, can you help me put this message out, warning everybody that, like, they're coming after me, they're going to kill me. And for whatever reason, I thought, no, they're not going to kill Anas, they're not going to kill him. Like, he's too well known, Amnesty has awarded him, he's got this huge following account, and for some reason I felt that, if anything, obviously that made him more of a target. And so waking up and hearing from a friend who works in human rights about Anas, I just, and him having a statement ready for his death, and all I can, he just kept reporting even though he knew his hours were numbered. Yeah, and I guess that for me was, that's something that I still struggle to digest. And then I got so angry soon after because much of the press, even here, led by Reuters, was running this line that he was a suspected terrorist, which we know is not true, which we know the IDF does to justify or smear anybody that it murders. And then, some would argue, as Chris Marr did in the interview, David Marr did in the terrible interview that he did with Chris, that, but they updated it a little bit later. Which is, any journalist, most journalists know that many people just read the headlines, and when it comes to misinformation and disinformation, by design, they know that even if you debunk it, the mud sticks. We know that. We also know that before Anas, they had killed about 200 other journalists. This is not our first rodeo in terms of IDF Hasbara. And yet, we still had, almost 2 years into the genocide, that line. So not only was he a man of enormous courage and a young father, so instead of him being humanised and pictures of him with his children and us being told what he loved and what he craved and all the things that we should know about him, we were told that he was a terrorist. And I will never forgive so many of my peers for doing that to such a beautiful man. I know he's just one man, and I know that there are many other men and women who have been killed in Gaza.
Well, as you may have picked up from my talks, I'm really angry at the Western media. I have watched them amplify lie after lie after lie. I come out of the Western media. I worked for the New York Times for 15 years. I can assure you those reporters know they are lies, and they repeat them for two reasons. One, they don't want blowback from both the Israel lobby, the Israeli government, and their editors, and they don't want to cut off their access. This is the activity of careerists, courtiers, but not journalists. And in every war that I covered, and for 20 years I was a war correspondent, there was a stark dividing line between those who got out into the field, risking their lives, and covered the war and transmitted what was happening from the ground, and those, the vast majority, who played at being war correspondents but never wanted to go anywhere near the combat. And that's precisely this was true in the war in El Salvador, it was true in Bosnia, it was true everywhere I went. And that is the dividing line between the Western press, holed up in their hotels in Jerusalem, getting background briefings, being fed one Israeli lie after another, which they disseminate, and the real journalists, which are the Palestinian journalists in Gaza. There is no division of culture, race, ethnicity, and religion. This is a division between real journalists and fake journalists. That's the only difference.
Chris, you say that that they know that they're lying and that they're careerists. I will add one other thing from my perspective, because sometimes I don't entirely believe that they always know that they're lying. Sometimes it's, I guess, the experience of someone who has a Lebanese background and who has been raised in Australia post Cronulla riots, post so-called war on terror, where we've seen 20 years of demonisation and dehumanisation when people have an Arab or Muslim background. Sometimes I truly feel that my colleagues don't see Arab life as worthy or as equal. And they are more likely to go, yeah, well, maybe they are a terrorist. You're either a threat or disposable. And so I think it's that level of dehumanisation that sometimes it's not that they know that they're lying. Sometimes I dare say sometimes they believe the lies.
Yeah, I think on that issue you're right, but I'm speaking about the journalists in the Middle East who cover Israel and deal with the Israeli propaganda machine. You'd have to be brain dead not to figure out that they're lying right and left. Because, for instance, in Gaza, I was based in Gaza, so they would carry out airstrikes, and it became a surgical strike on a bomb-making factory. That was like one of the lines. Or they would destroy houses, destroying the houses of terrorists. I mean, they had all these cliches that most, I think all of the press, even the ones who didn't go really to Gaza, were aware of. What you're talking about is the demonization of Palestinians, and that press, I think, I'm talking about the press that is actually located there. They all know Israelites. That's not debatable. And yet they repeat them anyway in a very cynical way because they don't want to confront the machine. And I'll just close by saying the problem with this is that it discredits the real reporting off the ground, and it obscures the truth. And in that sense, that is why I consider it a betrayal of our Palestinian colleagues. It is a betrayal of the people who are doing the real work of journalism.
Ahmed, I'm going to ask you, did you have a moment of, that's in your brain, of a journalist inside Gaza whose heroism has kind of, you'll hold on forever?
Absolutely. I mean, ever since the beginning of the genocide, we've been following Hassan Slayh on the Telegram, and everyone was following him day in, day out, every single hour, at night, at day. And the day when his tent outside Nasser Hospital was bombed and his colleagues were burned alive, and it was videoed live. Everyone saw that in the West, the image of his colleague burning alive. And I am always mind-boggled by the level of impunity of Israel. They didn't wait for this to cool down in the media, no. Hassan Slayh was injured in that incident, and he was taken to the hospital. He got burned in his face and his arm. And then a few days later, they sent a drone inside the room of the hospital and assassinated him. The audacity of Israel and the Israeli barbaric army, not even the terrorist army, of doing that under the guise of the whole world is watching. So what is that impunity? It's just mind-boggling how they behave and how their attitude towards what everybody thinks. So that moment is just, it's sad, it's frustrating, it's disappointing, it's so many feelings that you can't even capture in one word. Unbelievable.
I just wanted to add one thing. Even though an atrocity like that can be live streamed and captured and be barbaric and inhumane and breach international law and be plain as day, and even though a conversation like this can be happening at an event like this, the violence perpetrated by, and I'm using the word violence loosely here, but by sections of our corporatised media, our right-wing media, our Murdoch media, will ensure that we are distracted from that story. And so despite, you've just shared that, and even if you were to share that video tonight, and it is the first time you've ever shared that video, what will probably make the newspapers at Murdoch is something about me, something about the fact that I'm sitting under that sign, something about the fact that I am an anti-Israel, there's something about the fact that I hurt somebody's feelings. And this is what is happening in Australia. So much of the press distracts Australians about the subjective hurt feelings of certain people that support a genocide, as opposed to the actual atrocities committed by the genocide. And I know, Chris, you speak a lot about the actions of foreign correspondents and journalists on the ground. Locally, the assault on our ability to even exercise the right to use our eyes and have our senses. Like, we are punished if we use our eyes and see what we see and hear what we hear. And then we are just flooded with articles demonising protesters. The amount of hit pieces I had about me, what I said, what I wore, how I breathed, what I did. And it's all to send a warning to journalists like, get in line and look away, otherwise we will come after you. And so I just wanted to take a moment of the haunting realities, as you say, they are in plain sight. And then there is another war waged locally, and that is to instill fear on anybody here who wants to question our government's role in it, who wants to question the actions of the Israeli government, and who just wants to do their job as a journalist. We are intimidated and bullied and sacked and blacklisted, and it's to ensure that it sends a message to other journalists, hey, stay in line and look away. Stay in line and don't question why a drone, for a country, according to our Prime Minister, has the right to defend itself, is going in and killing an injured journalist by a drone in hospital. Like, we don't even have that level of conversation in our press, or that level of analysis, because we're not permitted to before we're bullied into silence.
It kind of leads to my next question, because I think what you all touch on is that what's happened in Gaza is not just like the death of life and land and hospitals and schools, but it's the death of principles that we hold dear: international law, journalism. And I guess I was wondering if you could comment on this, but perhaps in the context of how do we come out of this and build something different and better. Did you want to start, Chris? And actually, I've been asked that we stand up when we speak, which I should have done.
Sorry.
Yes, Pankaj Mishra wrote a very good book, The World After Gaza. I don't know if you know his work, he's brilliant. He also wrote a great book, The Age of Anger. And in it, I think he correctly highlights what's happened with the genocide as being equivalent to the kind of shock, social, cultural, intellectual shock of World War I for the global South. There's no going back. The visage of the so-called West has fallen away. It has been exposed for what it is. It has mocked the very concept of international humanitarian law. It has become, within the global community, a pariah like Israel. And yes, there will be a new global order. There will be a new way that nations relate to each other, but it's not going to come from the global industrialized country. It's come from the global South. That's where actually the great intellectual work, they don't even care about us anymore, nor should they. And that's, I think there's been an awakening within the global South, especially with the breakdown of the climate. And Gaza sends a very ominous message. And that is that we will stop at nothing to protect our climate fortresses, even genocide. And the only message that we in the industrialized nations seek to give to the rest of the world is we have everything, and if you try and take it away from us, we will kill you. That's where we are. Our intellectual, cultural, political, moral life has been exposed as bankrupt and empty, and I look to the global south for our future.
Advice I can give is, one that's, quite on an individual level. Despite this sort of assault on our democracy, because a democracy here in Australia has certainly been impacted as we try and, cover for or justify the atrocities that we see. So many of our institutions have bowed to external pressure. As at an individual level, despite the fact that these institutions that we often, I long believed in the ABC. In many ways, I still believe in the role of a robust and well-funded independent public broadcaster, is to not let this change who you are, and to not let, there's resistance in refusing to have your beliefs changed and your humanity changed. And boy, are we being tested, and boy, are we being bullied, and boy, are we being gaslit. But that refusal to go, no, this is what I believe, this is my humanity, this is my belief in democracy, this is my belief in the right for people to live freely and for children to, as Chris spoke about in his poems, to fly on planes and have rich lives and not be bombed on. That I will not be bullied into abandoning those beliefs. And also, I know collective power is power, but so is individual power. I was one person, one casual employee at the ABC who took on the largest media organisation in the country that was being influenced by arguably the most powerful lobby at this moment, one of the most powerful lobbies in the world. I took him to the federal court and I won. I am one person. And there were many times where I could have backed down. There were many times where it was suggested by well-meaning people that I back down. Bad things happen when good people do nothing, and I thought I have an opportunity to do something. So don't let this change your humanity, and don't underestimate the power you have as an individual.
Ahmed, did you want to touch on, sometimes it's hard as Palestinians to think of something better because our life is struggle, but what in terms of the question was, in light of the destruction we've seen, particularly of our principles, how do we build something better?
Oh, we've got a huge margin of things that we can think of to build our own system, our own fair and just system, really. I mean, ever since the genocide started, I've seen lots of unions, organized people spring to action, nurses for Palestine, health workers for Palestine, doctors for Palestine. But I haven't seen journalists for Palestine, like all these independent journalists come together. It's not a competition, It's not a competition. The competition is happening on the mainstream media, Get your heads together, work together, create this system of power that we need to maintain and hold ourselves through. Journalists for Palestine, journalism, lawyers. I mean, we see the Zionist lobby, wage, court cases left and right at Palestinian activists and activists who dare to speak about Palestine against genocide. We need these kind of aggregations, syndicates, getting together and form something more powerful than one or two or three people. We all have the skills, we have the capacity. Yeah, that's the only thing I can recommend.
So I have a question. Tilly, who's Tilly from Stop the War on Palestine, has a question to ask. Is Tilly here? Are you Tilly?
Oh, there we are.
I'll just pop over here so I'm not in everyone's way. I guess big meaty question to start, but Chris, you spoke very powerfully, I think, about the context in which Palestinian resistance forms. And I did want to ask about Hamas and the mainstream media, the way that Hamas is demonised, I guess, as barbaric and irrational, and is presented as the threat to peace and the reason for the genocidal war. So I wanted to ask what you think drives Hamas and what drives Palestinian resistance based on your experience as a journalist in Gaza.
Well, 2 points to begin with. One, Hamas is a resistance and a liberation movement. And two, under international law, it has every right to use armed force to defend itself and the Palestinians. I was in Gaza for the first and the second Intifada in Han Yunis. Were you there? No, I didn't see you, but you're probably about that high. So. I knew Abdulaziz Rantisi, one of the co-founders of Hamas, a pediatrician, extremely erudite. He founded Hamas with Sheikh Yassin, and he said to me innumerable times that this was a national liberation movement. That is what it was meant to be. Let's remember that it comes out of the Muslim Brotherhood. It's why Sisi and the Egyptian government has such animus towards Hamas. But the Oslo Accords sold out. In particular, they sold out all the Palestinians. That's why Edward Said called Arafat the Beitan of the Palestinian people. But Arafat gave up the right of return, i.e. the right of people to go back to their homes. Well, this had a disproportionate effect in Gaza because 75% of the people in Gaza are either refugees or the descendants of refugees. So Fatah was finished, and this betrayal on the part of Fatah and Arafat really led to the rise of Hamas. The question is often asked. By the way, you know, of course, the way that they set up these kind of traps for you is ask you, do you condemn Hamas? Do you defend Israel's right to exist? These are what Noam Chomsky called thought-terminating cliches.
Chris, I was just thinking tomorrow's headline in some of our tabloids is Chris Hedges supports Hamas. I was just, as you were talking.
Well, that's not the first time.
Yeah, I was just the minute there's, any kind of conversation about its origins, and yes, you can note that on October 7, many human rights organisations found that Hamas did commit war crimes. And it's not about absolving Hamas of any war crimes committed on October 7, but actually having a conversation about resistance and international law and its origins.
I've covered many resistance groups all over the world, and they don't have the tools of industrial violence. They don't have an air force, they don't have tanks, they don't have armored units, they don't have artillery, they don't have a navy. And so they used cruder forms. When I knew Rantisi, we had the bus bombings, which I was very opposed to, in Jerusalem. I lived in Jerusalem. And, but the fact is that the state terrorism is far, far worse. I'm not condoning to understand, and there were clearly atrocities committed by Palestinians on October 7th. That's incontrovertible. But when you trap people in a prison, most of these people had never been outside of Gaza their entire life. When you treat them as they were treated, they react as we would react. And Norman Finkelstein equates, I think correctly, October 7th to Nat Turner's slave revolt. When Nat Turner rose up, he and his small band killed every white that they saw. Again, that's not to condone it, but we must understand it. And whatever you think, you would not react any differently. And so is terrorism is always a tool that is used by resistance groups. The Jewish underground used it before 48. The ANC used it. And again, it's not, I don't like it. I didn't like the bus bombings. But that element of terrorism does not define Hamas. Hamas, with the bus bombings or suicide bombings, yes. But, you know, the Sri Lankan rebels, I mean, it's just endless. They all do. And of course, this demonization of Hamas, this turning the world into black and white, is just another way of not understanding what Israel has done and why Palestinians are reacting the way they are reacting. And that's extremely frustrating for those of us who spent as many years as I did covering the Middle East, because if we don't understand what's happening, we can't respond rationally. And those who seek to dehumanize and destroy the Palestinian people, that's exactly what they want. And of course, as you have just pointed out, their great ally is the media, which amplifies this cartoonish vision of the world, which bears no semblance, and I speak as an Arabic speaker and someone who lived there many months of my life in Gaza, bears no semblance to reality at all.
Just while we're on Hamas, so Anthony Albanese and other world leaders insist there can be no long-term peace without the disarmament of Hamas. But we don't hear the same call on Israel, considering the genocide is on their hands and their violence is state-level violence. And I was wondering... Sorry? And the settlers. Yes, and the settlers. So why is that the case? Ahmed, do you want to start this?
Why is what the case? Sorry.
Why our government and other Western nations insist on the disarmament of Hamas as a precondition for the current peace plan, but not on Israel?
Well, that's one. To me, there's a number of reasons, but I really see it from the colonizer's perspective. I'll stand up, sorry. I was saying there's a number of reasons, and one of them is them being sold out. But I really see it from the lens of a colonizer's perspective. We are living on a colonized country. We are living on, like I said in my acknowledgement, a ground zero of a genocide, you know? And there was resistance against the colonizers, and there were pummel war, and were bright examples of armed resistance against the colonization here. So that sentiment is deeply ingrained in the psyche of whatever government is. It's the conscious of the West, the colonizers West in the America, in North America, in Algeria, and it was in Algeria by the French, and it's here. It's very clear. They share the same values as Albanese always says. We share values with Israel. These are the values that they share. The values of genocide and barbarism and killing of indigenous people and feeding on the resources of a stolen land. That's basically how I see it. But like I said, there's a number of reasons.
I can just add a little bit. I can't speak to the sort of like the diplomatic or political, longer-term political strategy. My expertise is largely, obviously media and media framing. But what these kind of nefarious goalposts do is it provides sort of distraction. It helps set a narrative. If they just release the hostages, this will be over, which we know, given various peace deals ceasefire deals that never eventuated, even though the release of the hostages was on. It's just something to go, well, all of this is happening because they haven't done this. And this is continuing to happen because Hamas won't lay down its arms. What it does essentially is it gives this kind of like surface level narrative which confuses people who aren't too invested or who don't know much about the history in the region, or seem to think that nothing predates October 7. And doesn't actually point to, well, what's going to happen to the unlawful occupation. The amount of articles in Sydney Morning Herald and the Australian and all the broadsheets and even ABC and SBS going, what does this peace deal mean? You know, is this peace for the Middle East? And then, and I said this on my podcast, I'm like, this is what I do. I do a quick, this is my quick tip to realise if this piece is worth reading. I do Control F genocide. If the word genocide doesn't come up, if apartheid or occupation don't come up, or war crimes don't come up, if they're not going to actually talk about in this article the underlying issues that need to be addressed, then there are all these really superficial hot takes. Well, it'll just all be over when the hostages are returned and Hamas lays down its arms and everything's cool, we've got peace in the Middle East, guys, let's go. We're done. Thank you. Give Trump a Nobel Peace Prize. And so I honestly think that these kind of strange goalposts just help these really superficial narratives, and it helps provide cover for many of our leaders going, oh well, we got them to lay down their arms, let's forget about the settler violence in the West Bank, because, you know, let's give us a gold star for what we've done here.
So I'm just going to, I will come to you, Chris. I just wanted to bring in the two-state solution. A question did come in from Joyce regarding the two-state solution, and I wanted to bring it in because, from my perspective, is another goalpost that shifts. So is the two-state solution still possible? And you can answer that, Chris, and the previous question.
Well, no. I mean, Israel destroyed it. They control 80% of the West Bank and 90% of the buildings in Gaza. So they destroyed it. It's a one-state solution. It's called from the river to the sea, and it's one person, one vote. And just on the disarmament of Hamas, this is ridiculous. In what world does the genocidal killers impose conditions on those they kill? This is crazy. The people who have to disarm are the killers, Israel. I mean, this just shows how upside down the world is. Israel is imposing all sorts of... Look, I mean, I'm not going to read... I wrote a column called Trump's Sham Peace Plan, which you can read, and it goes through, because I covered Oslo and all, and that, and it's it's always done in phases. Israel gets, including the ceasefire agreements, Israel gets what it wants, and that it violates every other phase. There's a long history of that. But the idea that Israel gets to impose conditions, this is what is, Israel and its leaders are war criminals. I mean, there's just no way around it. And so they're deciding that they're cutting off the aid. How many people have they killed? I think over 100, right? Since the... What? 170. Including blowing away whole families. They cut off the aid. They just cut it. Well, first of all, they refused to abide by the agreement from the beginning, which was supposed to be 600 trucks. And then they just cut it off because this is not a peace plan. This is, yes, this is just a pause in, unfortunately, the genocidal project. That's all it is, that's all it was meant to be, and that's why the Israelis went along with it. Trump, I think 2 days afterwards, gave them the green light. They'll blame it all on Hamas, of course. Gave them the green light to... But Hamas isn't going to disarm, nor under international law should they disarm. You know, they have every right to carry out armed resistance. That is not disputable legally.
And just on the disarmament as well, it's funny because this is an admission of defeat for Israel, because they are trying to achieve something that they could have not achieved on the battlefield. They went into Gaza to disarm Hamas by force.
Eradicate Hamas.
To eradicate Hamas, and that's even worse.
Yeah.
Hamas is still there, it's regrouping, and it's armed, and it's standing its ground and fighting back. And something that they could not get in the battlefield, and they're trying to force, and using Trump, this is an admission of defeat, 100%, 100%.
We're going to come back to media and journalism, and I was wondering if Stephanie Tran from Michael West Media is here to ask her question.
My question is for Chris, but I would love the other panelists to weigh in as well. Chris, your speech yesterday so beautifully articulated the anger and the frustration that many of us have felt with the mainstream media's reporting over the past 2 years. Why do you think that so many journalists lack the moral courage to challenge the institutions of power, and what can we do to rebuild this courage?
Well, journalists are good careerists. They know what's good for their career. When I worked at the New York Times, nobody had to write the rules on the walls. People knew what they were. They knew what would get them advancement within the news organization and what would turn them into a management headache. So, especially when you get into these legacy elite media organizations, they've invested a lot of time and energy to get there, and they don't want to lose it. They don't want to lose. Working for the New York Times is, especially overseas, a fairly powerful position. If I called the president and saw that, they called me right back. And they like that imprimatur. They like that exercise of power, and it's very corrosive. So by the nature of the people who are attracted to those organizations, whatever their skills are as journalists, are such that they're willing to sacrifice their integrity in order to keep their positions. Because if you don't, or if you stand up, then you end up like me. And they don't want to end up like me. So, I mean, there's a cost. I mean, I went to divinity school, and the theologian Paul Tillich wrote that every institution is inherently demonic, including the church. Why? Because institutions are primarily concerned with their own perpetuation and survival, and those who lead those institutions will sacrifice moral principles for the flourishing of the institution itself. And that's, to quote another theologian, Reinhold Niebuhr, in Moral Man and Immoral Society, that's why institutions can never achieve the morality of individuals, who can carry out moral acts that are disadvantageous to their careers, to their safety, and even to their lives. But unfortunately, and I'm sure it's probably true at ABC, that when you reach that level, and it's very competitive and difficult to get in, you've really been conditioned to serve the institution rather than the readers or the viewers that media institution claims to want to inform.
And Ahmed made a point earlier about, there's teachers of Palestine, there's nurses of Palestine, and all of that. Why isn't there a journalist of Palestine? In late 2023, about 150 journalists signed an open letter to the industry. Some of you may have heard about it, and it was essentially calling for fairer, ethical reporting on Gaza, to treat the IDF with the same level of skepticism that you might treat Hamas, to humanise Palestinians, to be mindful of language and all of those things. Since then, certain media outlets have either outright banned, and this ban continues, anybody who signed that petition from reporting on Gaza in any way, shape or form. That includes going to a local protest or reporting on a family, like sort of kind of the secondary or third-hand sort of accounts of Gaza. That continues. Some were sort of bullied and sidelined so much that they left the industry. And then at the same time, there are a whole bunch of, pretty much the editor of the Sydney Morning Herald, The Guardian, I could rattle off a whole list of journalists who've been on paid junkets to Israel, which they continue to make editorial decisions and they continue to report. And so there's punishment, there's clear punishment for those, I mean, even signing a petition, you're either kind of quietly sidelined or bullied out of an organisation. That's not to say that you shouldn't have more bravery, but it's tough. And I'm not here to make excuses for people who go, cost of living crisis, people have mortgages and whatnot. But I took a big financial hit. I took a big hit. I lost about 80% of my income for 2 years. I had threats on my life. I had to have a guy prosecuted who was harassing and threatening me. I had to worry about my safety and my children's safety. And so I would love people to have more courage, but not everybody is willing to bear that price or have it affect their livelihood and their safety. I'd like more people to be courageous, but I also don't wish on what I've endured on anybody else either. So I guess I try and come to it from a place of empathy, and every time I struggled, I always thought, well, I mean, I think of the courage of Palestinian journalists and what they endure every day. And so even though I was threatened and I was frightened, I was always relatively safe. And that's what made me keep going, but I can't assume that everybody will do that.
Yeah, I echo what Antoinette and Chris said. I'm just going to add a little contribution to what I said earlier. I mean, allying with each other, forming these syndicates of independent journalists together, working together on exposing things like the great work that you do, Stephanie, Michael West and Yakov and Wendy and everyone else. These are really significant work. I mean, we all come together, but more importantly, the community needs to support that kind of journalism because they need to provide the safety net for those people who are intimidated into silence. They need to provide financial support, they need to provide social support. So it's not just the journalists on their own. We also need to come and support them and provide for them and keep fighting together because this is a united front. Journalists, lawyers, doctors, everyone. We're all under attack. We're all, every one of us, in the same way. So we need to provide that community social circle around every single bit of activism.
So I've just got one last question because I like to finish on kind of a positive note because these meetings can be heavy and we've heard some heavy things tonight. But there's also been successes over the past 2 years, like Antoinette's win is one of them. And I guess I just wanted to go to each panellist and ask, what are the successes that you've seen in the movement over the past 2 years that you hold on to and compels you to keep pushing forward?
Israel exposed. Yeah, I mean, the big success is that there's no going back. Israel has been exposed for the apartheid, genocidal state that it is. That's something that those of us who have been standing up for Palestinian rights for many, many years have been attempting to convey, and I think that's a huge success, and it's important because once you understand that, you understand what the Palestinians have endured and why they are enduring it. But I would cite that as probably the biggest success.
Yeah, I know it's always nice to try and finish on a place of hope, but what I would say when I'm not feeling hopeful is not to be ashamed or feeling the need to shelve righteous anger. I mean, we should feel anger. We should be angered by what we see. We should not be complacent, and sometimes I've allowed myself to not feel the need to sugarcoat just how horrible it all is and how much more work needs to be done. What invigorates me though is connecting to like-minded people, finding a community of people from a range of backgrounds and ages, and just not connecting with people who care and connecting with people who refuse to let these atrocities change their fundamental beliefs. I've met and connected with much more people like this. I felt abandoned by many of my colleagues, but have been supported by so many others. So for me, what I carry forward and what I'm hopeful about is the humanity of good people and the number of good people who care.
Yeah, I mean, they're all wins. I mean, mine is a small one, probably. For some of you know that I host the Red Inverted Triangle podcast, and I'm using the episodes of that podcast into a radio show called Pulse of Palestine. And recently the Zionists went after Pulse of Palestine because I referred to my red inverted triangle, which is somehow is an anti-Semitic symbol now. It was investigated by ACMA, and it was found that it's not in preach. So I'm very, very happy with that win. That's a promotion for the podcast. Go on.
Red Inverted Triangle is definitely a success of the past 2 years, and there's been heaps. Like, how many actions are there for Palestine every single week? It's like something every night. So thank you everyone for showing up, and to echo Antoinette's point, the community is a really big success, and let's keep pushing forward. So thank you, Ahmed, Antoinette and Chris. Round of applause for everyone.